Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to chapter 4 in the Prophetic Love Story. It's kind of like we're doing premarital counseling here for 10 days, is what he told me. We're reading a book. If you don't know what Prophetic Love Stories are, that is where when the Lord has told you who you're going to marry, it's like a God-ordained or God-arranged marriage. That's exactly what it is, really. It's where he tells you who he wants you to marry, and then he molds you, and he built you for this person. He built you all for each other. Like Genesis 2:22, where he put Adam to sleep, took a rib, and made the woman. He's making us for each other, and I think that's so amazing. And he's got us reading this book because a lot of these marriages are about to come into fruition. So we're going to start with chapter 4. I'm going to get comfortable first. I'll put my feet up. This is by Ed Young. It's the 10 Commandments of Marriage. And we're on chapter 4. A personal word. Thou shalt make conflict thy ally. Conflict can destroy a marriage, but it can also bring fresh breezes and new life into the relationship. The marriage can become stronger through disagreements and adversity. Sometimes marriage is like a duel. When we learn how to successfully handle conflict, guess what? It becomes a duet, and the harmony produced from it is almost divine. So decide whether your marriage is going to be a duel or a duet. I like that. I like that song too. I hope it's not too loud. Commandment 4, thou shalt make conflict thy ally. Surely you and your wife never fight, do you? I wish I had a nickel for every person who had asked me that question, or just a penny for all the others who actually believe it. I'd be a wealthy man. Joe, Beth, and I have been married more than 40 years, so you might think by now that we are through with all the battles and disagreements. Surely after 40 years, we've got everything worked out. Well, not exactly. Once in a while, I have to remind Jo Beth of some basic principles. Actually, that's not true. It happens regularly, and more often, she has to remind me. I'm grateful that Jo Beth and I have a strong marriage, but as I have admitted throughout this book, we are still growing in our relationship and still have areas to work on. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. No marriage is immune to conflict. Remember, in marriage, two separate individuals have joined to become one, so some friction and tension certainly will take place at the intersection of their union. 2 myths about conflict. The 4th commandment for a successful marriage is one that many couples question. It is thou shalt make conflict thy ally. The reason couples question this commandment is because of a couple of prevailing marital myths. So as we begin, let me quickly explode those 2 myths. Good marriages do not have problems. Do you ever fight with your husband or wife? Do you quarrel with your mate? If so, congratulations, you have a perfectly normal marriage. Some people think that 2 people in love will never suffer any kind of significant conflict. That's simply not true. Every married couple, no matter how well matched or how spiritually mature, will have conflict. It's a normal part of marriage. The question is, how do we handle our battles, fights, misunderstandings, disputes, and miscommunications? The right responses to that question will lead to a great relationship. Number 2, conflict hurts good marriages. Conflict does not have to hurt a solid marriage. In fact, conflict is an important part of every good marriage. Handled wisely, it can lead to greater intimacy. Handled poorly, it can lead to greater isolation. We can choose whether we will have conflict, only how we deal with it. We can't choose whether we will have conflict, only how we deal with it. So what will you choose? Intimacy or isolation? In many ways, marriage is like 2 cold porcupines that move closer together for warmth. They will have conflict. Of course, if these 2 porcupines were to stay by themselves, they could avoid all conflict and they'd also stay cold. For the porcupine union to work, there has to be some negotiation. Some people think that they have a good marriage because they never have any conflict. How do you think they manage that? I'll tell you how. They live independently of one another. You do your thing and I'll do mine. We'll get together every once in a while and to deal with a few things. You do your thing and I'll do mine. We'll get together every once in a while to deal with a few little things, but by and large, we'll pursue separate and independent agendas. Anyone can avoid conflict by living like a solitary porcupine, but if you desire true intimacy, you have to make decisions together and move together. Not in a duel, but as a duet. After all, two porcupines that move closer together must learn to relate to one another very carefully, or they will cause one another tremendous pain. Yet it is out of this kind of conflict that real intimacy comes, resulting in a strong marriage. All marriages, the good ones and the bad ones, have problems, and the difficulties in each type of marriage closely resemble each other. The crucial differences lie in how a good marriage handles conflict. The Bible tells us to count it all joy. James 1:2, when trials and adversities come. Why count it all joy? Because conflict produces endurance, and endurance produces maturity. Good and bad conflict. I'm always astounded at the number of people I meet who actually believe marriage will fix their lives and make everything just right. Here's a guy who has difficulty with friends, clashes at work, trouble in school, and poor family relationships, but by getting married, he thinks everything will turn out great. Or a girl who thinks that by saying I do, her life will turn blissfully happy till death do us part. Where did we get such foolish idea? The Bible tells us that conflict goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. When sin entered this world, it negatively affected every relationship in every family. Nevertheless, as I've suggested, conflict in marriage is not always sin. The presence of problems, tensions, and arguments don't necessarily mean trouble for a marriage. I believe that Adam and Eve had good conflict prior to their sin. I can't imagine Adam sitting there telling Eve what he had to name all the animals and Eve not having a better idea once in a while. Can you? Two very different personalities, both created by God, are bound to have differences of opinion with conflict ensuing. But there is both good and bad conflict. There is constructive conflict and destructive conflict. Suppose a man has a friend named Jack who has a birthday coming up. He says to his wife, honey, let's not forget to send Jack a card. His birthday is next week. His wife replies, Jack is one of your best friends. I think you ought to get him a birthday present, not just a card. No way, he answers. Jack wouldn't want a present. We're grown men. A card will be more than adequate. But Jack isn't any old friend. He's your best friend, she responds. Remember, he also took you to the ball game last week. Well, sure, Jack and I are close, he admits, but anything more than a birthday card just wouldn't fit. Listen, she insists. It's his 40th birthday, and that's a tough time for good old Jack. He's going through a real transition right now. I think if you did a little extra, it would be really nice. Wasn't he there with you when your dad passed away? And he's been your right hand all these years, so get him a present. I think it'll do him good. Let's stop the conversation at this point. Here we see a conflict arising out of the difference of opinion, not out of sin. Let's consider 3 ways such conflict could be handled. First, the husband could say, I think you're right. Jack is special, and it is his 40th birthday. What do you suggest we get him? Second, he could say, I don't think we need to get Jack anything for his birthday. We're adults, for Pete's sake. But if it'll make you happy, go and buy him something, and I'll give it to him. Third, he could say, I'm absolutely opposed to getting Jack a birthday present. That's just stupid and childish, how ridiculous. And he's my friend, not yours, so stay out of my life. Now I've got to go. You always bring up such crazy things when I'm in a hurry. And he storms out of the house. The first scenario demonstrates a constructive response to conflict. The husband ponders his wife's suggestion and thinks, my wife knows about these things better than I do. She's a birthday person. She remembers all of them. So he says to her, I think you're right. His response encourages her to continue to offer advice. And most of us men need advice even if we won't admit it. The second approach just shuts her down. She gets her way. Jack gets a birthday gift, but the approach does more harm than good, for she receives no encouragement to offer her husband any assistance in the future. The third response is purely destructive. He banishes her from the battlefield and uses some terminal words to wound her spirit, such as ridiculous, crazy, stupid, and childish. John Gottman, a marriage researcher at the University of Washington, has studied conflict in marriage. With his wife, Julie, and research psychologist Sybil Carrere, Gottman developed criteria for predicting whether or not a marriage will survive. Gottman and his team reportedly can make the prediction within 3 minutes of assessing a couple. For more than 2 decades, the Gottman team has tracked 700 couples and predict with 91% accuracy whether couples will divorce by listening to how a couple argues. According to the specialist, you can tell if a marriage is going to make it. The evidence revealed that couples must take care how they communicate, especially when they argue and fight. In our illustration, the husband's third response fell into the destructive category mainly because he attacked the person, not the problem. Over time, this type of response can be fatal to the marriage relationship. How can we train ourselves to use the conflict that inevitably come into every marriage for constructive rather than destructive purposes? Let's begin by considering some of the most important traps to avoid. The don'ts of conflict. Destructive conflict uses several inappropriate weapons of war to win its battles. We would head off a lot of this type of conflict if we'd remember the following 7 don'ts. Don't be ashamed of your anger. Anyone who wants to be useful in this world will get angry. If you never get angry, I doubt you've developed much as a person. Issues should matter. Your opinions and conclusions are important. Don't remember, anger is not the issue. How you deal with your anger is. As we've already noted, many times in marriage, opposites attract. We see in the other person. Sometimes we don't have, as we've already noted, many times in marriage, opposites attract. We see in that other person something we don't have but like. Often those differences are what bring the spark and creativity to the relationship. But what happens when a prize fighter marries a peacemaker? Here's a guy who grew up in a home that responds to conflict by bringing out the gloves when a disagreement arose. His family would lay everything on the table and duke it out. Everybody told everybody else what they really thought, and that usually led to relational black eyes. His peacemaker wife is different. Every time conflict came to her family, everyone grew deathly quiet. Shh, don't mention it, don't bring it up, and don't talk about it. Anything to keep peace in the family. So as an adult, she runs away from kind of conflict or confrontation. She sweeps it under the rug and refuses to admit it exists. Now look what happens when they marry. The prize fighter sees a problem and yells, "Let's deal with it." The peacemaker thinks, "Oh no, I don't want to deal with it. I'll do anything but that. I don't want to talk about it." So she withdraws and avoids the problem. Now who gets in between the prize fighter and the peacemaker? Far too often it's the little 6 or 7-year-old child. "Daddy, don't you know Mama doesn't like to fight?" "I don't care what your mama wants," he growls. Sometimes Junior takes Dad's side. "Mama, don't you know that Daddy just wants to talk? You need to talk to him." "I don't want to talk to him," she says. "I can't talk about it." Soon the child can become a human ping pong ball between Mom and Dad. Let me take a moment to address the worst thing that sometimes happens in this type of relationship: violence. It shatters the home, especially the children. Homes where exploitation and abuse exist tend to create homes of exploitation and abuse. But there's no place for that ever. If your home suffers from this type of anger, seek out the help and counsel available in your church or community. And remember, even violent marriages can be healed with the aid of caring individuals and a loving and powerful God. While we shouldn't hide our anger, there is an appropriate way to express anger that has nothing to do with pushing or shoving or slapping or hitting. Anger is a good thing, not a bad thing. The Bible says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are angry," Ephesians 4:26. Of course, one has to be mature to handle anger properly, and that's where so many of us miss the boat. We flare up, get angry, and attack the person instead of the problem. Arguments in which a husband and wife honestly express their anger can be therapeutic. When disagreements arise, we need to let our mates know that we love them and that it's time to get on with it and settle the dispute. This can be both good and healthy. So don't be ashamed of your anger. Number 2, don't call in heavy artillery or use deadly weapons. While expressing anger can promote a healthy relationship, remember that you're not in this thing to wipe out your spouse. You don't want a complete, unconditional victory. Those who fail to figure this out inflame their conflicts, leading to greater isolation instead of greater intimacy. So leave some room to maneuver. In Operation Desert Storm, the successful offensive during the 1991 Persian Gulf, Allied forces tried to do a minimum amount of damage while making their point. In that war, the American news media introduced us to smart bombs that could pinpoint a target and do very little, if any, collateral damage. The Allies realized that is such a thing as overkill. Sometimes when we get into an argument with our mate, we call in the heavy artillery, but instead of the smart bombs, we send off an errant and unpredictable Scud missile of the enemy. I'll leave, we yell. We'll get a divorce. We mimic television couples when we've seen go ballistic. The TV husband gets up after saying about 3 words and storms out and slams the door. And real husbands think, now that's the manly way to handle conflict. No, it's not. It's a cowardly thing to do. We need to stay in the ring, listen carefully, and have the courage to deal head on with whatever troubles our mate. Anybody can run. Cowards do it all the time. Number 3, don't air your dirty linen in public. A few years ago, I read about a disastrous wedding reception at the Blue Dolphin Inn in Southern California. Right in the middle of the reception, while 300 guests happily talked and reminisced about the young couple, the bride and groom broke into a violent argument. Eventually, the groom grabbed part of the wedding cake and threw it in the face of the bride. Kapow! Immediate food fights and fist fights broke out between the family's friends and members of the wedding party. Bedlam reigned. By the time the police arrived, the bride and groom had disappeared. This may be an extreme illustration, but it points out the dangers of airing your dirty linen in public. Don't discuss your private conflicts in front of friends, family, or business associates. Also, don't inappropriately pour out your heart to your friends or your parents or some other confidant. That will hurt your mate and do nothing to help resolve normal marital conflict. Take it to God. Take everything to Him. Take everything to the Lord. Give it to Holy Spirit. He will give you the wisdom to fix it or to not talk about it. He will tell you exactly what to do. Give it to the Lord. Give it to Him. Number 4, don't paint yourself into a corner. Too many of us paint ourselves into a corner by our poor choice of words. If you don't stop, we'll say, I'll get a lawyer. We use big, broad, sweeping statements and threats to control our mate. We reach way back into our arsenal and drag up something we've dealt with before and bring it into the battle. All is not fair in love and war. If marriages had referees, they'd blow the whistle or throw the flag on this tactic. Don't paint yourself into a corner. Don't maneuver yourself into a position from where there is no retreat. Don't use the turtle approach. Number 5. When a turtle encounters a problem, he climbs into his shell, hunkers down, and stays there. A lot of us become turtle-like in the face of marital conflict. We grow silent. Of course, a little silence may be good. Sometimes we need to back up and think a minute. Sometimes we need to walk away and say, time out. Let's have a truce. But that's not the turtle approach. The turtle approach says, I'm going to remain silent. I'm not going to say anything until she apologizes, or I'm not going to respond until he responds. So the two of you sleep side by side in the bed about 6 inches apart, doing your best to not even touch one another. Too many of us refuse to face the little conflicts of marriage. We won't get them out into the light and talk about them. And over time, our molehills grow into ominous mountains. So avoid the turtle approach. I've never yet met a turtle with a good marriage. Number 6, don't keep a chip on your shoulder. Some of us handle conflict with a chip on our shoulder. We overstate things. We take a little situation and generalize it and make it sound as if it has been a situation from the very beginning. We act like the wife in the middle of a battle who looked at her husband and said, you have every characteristic of a dog except one. And which one is that? Loyalty. Humorous, but way too strong. That is a huge overstatement, but some of us do exactly that when we're angry. We keep the chip on our shoulder and allow ourselves to spin out of control. I have seen people do that. Don't use sex as a weapon. I've seen this one used too. I hear about these things. Some use sex as a tool of punishment or reward. They might say to their mate, I'm not going to make love to you until we get things worked out. But when sex becomes a weapon of manipulation, the whole physical relationship degenerates. Many a husband grow angry and depressed because he feels as though he has to earn his wife's affection. Such a weapon can spark an arms race. Too many husbands have said, I'll show you, I'll find love in the arms of another woman. Jesus meant it when he said, all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Matthew 26:52. Take care to heed the don'ts of conflict. Failure to do so has started innumerable couples down a heart-trending path. 4 stages of heart hurt. When we deal with conflict the wrong way, tension continues to build in the home until we progress through 4 stages of hurt. Each stage can lead to greater alienation between husband and wife. The wounded heart. We all know something about this stage. Our mates have wounded us and we've wounded them. Sometimes it happens intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. If we're sensitive at all, we pick up our mate's signals and know when he or she feels wounded. We know when something's wrong, when things have gotten out of balance. No married person can honestly say, I've never known anything about the wounded heart. Ignore the wounded heart long enough and it turns into something else. Number 2, the cold heart. During the second stage, a husband might recognize his wife's wounded heart and begin to talk to her. But without trying to resolve the conflict, communication takes place, but it lacks any power to resolve the dispute. Usually such communication sounds overly nice. The couple may act indifferently toward each other. Here's Mr. Cool, she's Mrs. Unflustered, the conflict doesn't bother me. As they avoid the issues and any meaningful contact with each other, the cold heart sets in. Number 3, the hard heart. The third stage reflects serious trouble. It is the hard heart stage. You begin to grieve the Holy Spirit. You have trouble praying. See Ephesians 4:30, 1 Peter 3:7. When you're not in a right relationship with your mate, how can you pray? And the Bible also says if you're not in a right relationship with your mate, that your prayers are hindered and blocked, that he ain't even hearing you. So get it right. Heaven seems blocked and God seems far away. And at the hard heart stage, you're metallic and tough. As you go through the motions, you begin to wonder if your marriage will last. All kinds of conflict may break loose, but you're so hard and cold and businesslike you really don't care. And that leads to the 4th and fatal stage, the apathetic heart. The opposite of love is to hate. The opposite of love is not hate, but apathy. It's indifference, an attitude of I don't care. Through the years, I've counseled many couples on several different occasions. I've heard men bitterly declare how much they hated their wives or vice versa. They'd say they couldn't stand this or they despise that. After letting them talk a while, I'd say, you really love her, don't you? They would always look at me astonished and ask, how could you tell? Easy, it was because of your anger. It was because of their anger. There's hope for such a man or a woman. But what about the couple who display nothing but apathy and indifference? He doesn't care, she doesn't care, love seems gone and their marriage destroyed. How tragic. And it's even more tragic because the marriage plummeted to the 4th stage over conflicts that didn't even amount to much. Father, we thank you and praise you for this day. We thank you and praise you for your love, your mercy, and grace, and our ability to come before you at all times, in times when there's peace and in times when there's not, and in times of trouble. And we thank you for the power of your blood. And we repent for holding on to any grudges, any bitterment, resentment, anger, jealousy, that is causing calloused areas and apathy in our heart. And we cover all calluses in our heart with your blood, the healing, atoning power of your blood. Thank you. Thank you for touching our hearts, that we have clean, pure hearts that are yours. That thank you. We love you so much. How to keep conflict constructive. Let's get very practical. How can we keep the conflict in our marriages constructive? Between conflicts, sit down with your partner and determine the pattern of conflict in your marriage. Again, don't do this while the drums roll and everybody is choosing their weapons. Do it when everything seems relatively calm and peaceful. Say to one another, let's sit down and talk. Let's do some preventative maintenance. During what circumstances or time does conflict tend to surface in your marriage? Identify these areas of tension and discuss what you might be able to do about them. Consider John and Mary. It seems that every time they go out together, World War III breaks out. She gets exhausted early and wants to go home while the evening is young. He's a slow starter and begins having a good time just about the time she feels dead on her feet. Oh, let's go, she says. No, let's stay a little longer, he replies. They go home angry almost every time they go out. What should they do? In a neutral moment, they need to sit down and analyze their patterns. They might decide that on the days they plan to go out for the evening, Mary will rest a little in the afternoon. Second, prior to leaving for an open-ended event like a party, they will agree on a time to leave. It won't take long for them to understand that John is not trying to exhaust his wife, nor is Mary trying to squash her husband's fun. They realize their problem relates to varying body metabolisms and different personalities, and so they agree upon a procedure that heads off future conflicts. That's smart. How simple. Actually, most of our conflicts in marriage don't get much more complicated than that. We could find workable solutions to our disagreements if we would only sit down and deal reasonably with them. When the battle lines are drawn, suppose you've not yet practiced preventative medicine and the battle lines have already been drawn. What can you do when the conflict explodes? Let me suggest several things. Talk and listen to God. Pray. Verbalize your conflict to God and listen for His response. So many times in moments of conflict, I begin to pray, "Oh Lord, change my children. Oh Lord, change my wife." When I finish my little plea, the answer often comes back, "I intend to, but let's start with your children's father and your wife's husband. Before you do anything else, talk and listen to God." And I've noticed that when I need something changed, it has to be changed to me first, and then people around me will either change or fall away. Number 2, try to understand your mate. You say it's too rough to understand your mate. I really doubt that. We used to have a paper boy who came every morning at the same time like clockwork. The whole neighborhood could tell when Greg arrived on the scene, including the dogs. The canine crew seemed to come out of the woodwork. You wouldn't believe the barking, howling, and growling that erupted as they all headed for poor old Greg. He would take his papers or sticks or rocks or whatever he could find to beat off his dogs. Morning after morning, the same bedlam took place. One day, a new paper boy took over the route. At first, all the dogs rushed out as usual, growling and snapping and trying to get him like they had Greg. But this young boy had a different plan. He began to speak to the dogs in a welcoming and friendly way. He knew they were all just pets, not really vicious. He figured out that the dogs sensed a challenge to their turf. He understood they felt frightened and insecure, so he began to pet one of these little beasts. A week went by and another canine got in on the petting. Finally, the toughest dog in the neighborhood became his best buddy. From that time on, all these vicious dogs would run out with their tails wagging whenever they heard the paper boy coming. They felt overjoyed to see him because they knew he was going to pet them. Now surely we're as smart as the average paper boy. We need to understand our mates, what frightens her or agitates him. Just think a moment. Could it be your partner feels insecure or needs a little extra petting? Number 3, try to understand yourself. This may be the toughest assignment of all. Most of us are either too easy or too hard on ourselves. Ask yourself, why am I on edge today? Why did I say that? Why am I acting like this? What's going on in my life that has caused me to bring this office home or make me take my home to the office? Be honest. The best advice I could ever give you is to be honest with yourself. You can be honest and vulnerable with yourself and with Jesus when you don't feel like you can with anybody else. Because I have not had anybody through this process. So when I tell you you can take everything to Jesus and give Him everything, I'm speaking from experience because that's what I did. And I've stopped trying to understand anything. Take it to Him. Take it to Him. And get to know yourself, your heart. Get to know yourself. Talk to your heart. Let her talk to you or him talk to you. 3 deep breaths, and then on the last breath will get you in your consciousness into your heart, so you can talk to your heart and get to know yourself. Because knowing yourself is, I think, one of the best things that has ever happened to me. And I'm not sure that it would have happened if I weren't a brain injury survivor. To be honest, I'm not sure I would have stopped long enough to get to know me, because it stopped me dead in my tracks, like literally. If you need help in understanding yourself, that's okay. Others sometimes see what we cannot. That's why the Bible says the purpose of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Proverbs 20:5. Find a man, or if a wife, a woman of understanding, and ask this friend to help you see your strengths and your shortcomings. See if he or she can help you draw out the deep waters of your heart. Make a list. Make a list. Talk to your mate. That's number 4. No relationship can thrive without regular and healthy communication. But when you talk, make sure you pick positive, edifying words. You know how most men and women respond to conflicts in marriage. They react with harsh words. They retaliate. They offer insult for insult. Mostly, I've seen that. That has to stop. You control your mouth and love on your spouse, and the retaliation stop that, and you won't get as much hate from them. I've seen that. Why do you wear your wedding ring on the wrong finger? A wife asks. Because it reminds me I married the wrong woman, he replies. We have a good marriage, says a wife, because both of us love the same man, you. You love football more than you love me, a woman complains. Maybe so, her husband replies, but I love you better than baseball. What do your husband and you have in common? A counselor wondered. One thing, the woman replied. Neither one of us can stand the other. These statements may be humorous, but they help illustrate the lowest common denominator to which many marriages sink in exchanging insult for insult, injury for injury. Psalm 141:3 offers a better way. The psalmist asks the Lord to put a watch over his lips. We too need to pray, Lord, put a watch over our lips. Lord, be the keeper of our mouths. We also could use a dose of Proverbs 15:1, which says, a gentle answer turns away wrath. We do not return insult for insult, but blessing for insult. We have to learn to trade sweet for bitter, so pick your words carefully. And don't return evil for evil, because he's told me that, because so many people do. And it's revenge, getting retaliation. Number 5, don't let the sun go down on your anger. We've said it before, don't let your wrath fester. See Ephesians 4:26. Don't let your anger get past the wounded heart stage. It will fester. The anger will settle in there, and it's a seed. Anger is a seed. And if you already have a tree of anger, you're just going to get more angry fruit. So don't reprogram yourself to where you're not mad when you go to bed, and reprogram yourself. This doesn't mean you and your spouse agree on everything. It does mean you'll stay up late many nights, making sure you never go to sleep until you get your heart together. Joe, Beth, and I have decided to never go to sleep at night until our hearts get together. The issue may not be resolved, but we will not let anger be our last emotion as we drift off to sleep. When we often accomplish this by touching toes. Whenever bedtime comes and we're still upset with one another or working through a conflict, we turn out the light and think through the first 4 steps. Talk and listen to God. Try to understand your partner. Try to understand yourself, and talk to your mate. So as we lie there in the dark, we each pray. We try to understand where the other is coming from, while also looking at ourselves. We think through what's been said and how we've said it. It's amazing how we go through this process at about the same pace. We finally reach a point where we'll just touch toes in bed. That's our way of saying, I love you, and I know we're going to work this out. Number 6, make confession and forgiveness a priority. Once you've completed these 4 steps and touched toes, the next step is to say, honey, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? These words allow conflict to open the door to a stronger relationship. So many times offering a little forgiveness is all it takes to bring a couple back together. In destructive conflict, one individual or another may win, but the marriage is a loser. Let's learn how to handle conflict in a constructive fashion. When we do, neither individual wins, but the marriage does, and our relationship grows stronger. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saying I'm sorry. Be the first one to say it. Be quick to say it, because you don't know what their perspective of what happened is. And it will open the door for more communication and problem solving. Learn to control your reactions. Have you ever considered that your reactions may have a greater effect on your marriage than your reactions may have a greater effect on your marriage than your actions? Actions remain vitally important, of course. We help or hurt those we love with our actions. But even if our actions are perfect, we can devastate our marriages through inappropriate reactions. For example, if I don't lie, cheat, commit adultery, steal, or get drunk, you would say my actions get an A+. But what if, in a moment of conflict, I lash out with jealousy, hatred, or a spirit of revenge? In a very real sense, my reactions can cause more damage or create more harmony than my actions. Many times when we react inappropriately, we say, that really wasn't me. I admit I have a temper, but that was not the real me. I have news for you. That's the real me, and that is the real you. How we respond in conflict reveals the real person inside, and it reveals how healed your heart is. Think of it this way. What happens when you put a tea bag in a cup of hot water? The water soon begins to turn brown. Why? Did the hot water turn itself brown? No. The brownness was in the tea bag the whole time. The hot water merely brought out its natural color. Or what happens when you squeeze a lemon? Sour, bitter juice comes out. Did the squeezing make the lemon sour and bitter? No. The squeezing merely brought out the sourness and bitterness already present. In the same way, we find ourselves in hot water or being squeezed in our marriages. What comes out is what's inside. Therefore, we need to work not only on our actions to our mates, but also on our reactions in our moments of crisis. And I think it's Luke 6:45 that out of the heart, everything flows. I think that's it. So, get your heart right. And life and death are in the power of your words. Proverbs 18:21. And your words will tell people how healed your heart is, because you'll be able to control your reactions, your emotions, your everything. It's pretty cool. Lucky for him, conflict comes into every marriage, but it's up to us to make sure it serves a constructive purpose. Conflict in the home can lead to endurance and a deepening of our relationship to both our spouse and to God, and that leads to maturity. A much loved grandmother was celebrating her 50th wedding anniversary. One of the daughters asked, "Mama, what is the key to the happiness and joy that you and Daddy have known throughout the years? Please tell everybody your secret." "Well," she began, "when your daddy and I first got married, I made a list of 10 things I would overlook about his personality, things I just didn't like. The day we walked down the aisle, I made a promise that when any of those 10 things came up, I would overlook it for the sake of marital harmony." "Granny," one of her granddaughters excitedly replied, "Tell us that list. Tell us what those 10 things were." "Well, honey," she answered, "to be honest, I never did write them down. But every time your grandfather would do something to make me hopping mad, I would think, lucky for him, it's one of those 10 things." That's great. I love that. What 10 things make you hopping mad about your own mate? What behavior event tends to cause the most conflict in your house? Whatever those 10 things may be, you would be wise to use this grandmother's example. In fact, we all would be. Then we too would be on our way to the golden marriage. I love that. Reflecting on your relationship. If you're married, how has a conflict resulted in strengthening a weak point in your relationship with your spouse? Are you a peacemaker or a prize fighter? Explain. How do you need to change to make conflict an ally rather than an enemy? How did your parents handle conflict when you were growing up, and how has that pattern affected you? If you are contemplating or preparing for marriage, what conflicts or tensions do you have at present in your relationship? If you believe that there are no conflicts, perhaps you or your beloved are not being open about your attitudes, performance, or feelings. Do you express your disagreements to each other? Why or why not? Discuss with your beloved those things that created tensions. Ask him or her to do the same. Together, plan strategies to deal with conflicts in the future. And that's it. And that's the end of chapter 4. And tomorrow night we'll read chapter 5. Chapter 5 is halfway. And I am excited. So I will see you tomorrow night. I love you. Have a great evening.